Tripe, written and recorded by Verity Platt. We know the facts, and they are these. Butter is not a substitute for clay. Tripe is the name for a dog in a vessel. It is possible to be woman and beast at once. What is not so clear to us is whether a mother can remain a beast after the birth. This is a question that hides tricks under its skirts, so we'll throw it to the trees and let the birds decide. Put the fate of the beastly mother in something that has wings and more than just a hole for a mouth. We think this wiser than giving the job to a man of the cloth who likes to talk with an eager tongue on these matters. He is wingless and boring. There's a pocket of land in this January town that's certainly seen both motherly beast and beastly mother for what it's worth. This is land that's been wrapped and bound in the dressings of many before we meet it as it is now, calling itself Nutsford Vale, and dressed today as a whitewashed fen of a public park. As sure as a wound will close over with the necessary seal, land that is full and ripe with rot will always remedy its parts and return with a skin stretched anew. Nutsford is lately pushing young finger branches who point to each other overhead in sly accusation. They lacerate the fleshy, pitless sky of a murkier white and catch mispronounced admissions of the park's walkers and wailers. The branches serve too as a stern for the birds that will peck at the muddy words, eat and spit them back out in a more digestible tongue. They laugh at the confessions of the walkers and outpourings of the wailers, who march themselves with hopes to wane whatever irks and ails them. The colours they've earned this week past now paint their many faces in a guise with which they resolutely do not identify, wish to shed and do away with. Here is a dumping ground for every part of a fool undesired. And she is one such fool. Butter, they call her, but we won't call her that, for it surely wasn't her mother's choice. We might have guessed it Bridget, or perhaps a Frances, judging by the hard piety of mother and there being nothing soft or disarming in her face that a name like Butter promises. We are forgiven, then, for assuming her name isn't one of soft stuff. Marta, in the end, is the name her mother chose for her. And mother is a stone, a formidable tightening in Marta's throat. Life giver and taker is how she lives in her daughter's mind and mouth. Marta's father, 20 years gone now that Marta had reached 40, was a miner of clay back when Nutsford bore the name of Jackson's Clay Pit. Mother and father were clearly troubled but mercifully silent about Marta's shortcoming of being a girl. Not the boy her father had hoped might wear his good genes by doing the kind of real, selfless work he did, nor the modest, God-fearing woman her mother lived her days in the shoes of. Fascinated and reverent of her father's work, Marta spent her early years seeking a place in his hands amongst the clay he touched daily. When he'd resurface from 12 hours in the pit, Marta would gather his workwear, its colour indiscernible from the soiled seal that now covered its surface. She'd imagined she was kneading some essence of herself into the fabric as she rubbed her father's wrappings in the tub. Once soaked, wrung, and hung, Marta would put her own unwashed girl body in the space the clothes had just moments ago been, and bathe as a beast in a swamp, swathed in her father's muddied water. She slept sounder in the knowledge that she'd shared in her father's dirt, privately cultivating a closeness that could embrace her behind the bathroom door. It made sense, then, to Marta, that from here sprung a path wet and wide for her to take. From swamp beast to potter was what she'd grow to be. It's itchy and always divine to return to the house that knew her as a girl, to re-enter the walls that covered her while she designed and discarded a number of different martyrs. And lately she's returning more frequently to offer her hands to care for her mother who doesn't want them. Marta's visits to Nutsford Vale have also increased. She doesn't have to go through the park to get from her studio to her mother's house. The route takes her longer, in fact. She chooses to walk this way regardless. Each time she passes through the park, she gives thanks that Nutsford is still Nutsford and ever hungry for the kind of confessions she can offer it. Without it, she knows she'd come undone. She also knows it's good manners and shrewd to cleanse herself in this way before entering her mother's house. At age 4 as at 40, Mother thinks it important to remind her daughter she is unremarkable, and so Marta makes no faces and remembers not to grunt when Mother offers up her tight and jagged remarks. She wouldn't want to make less pleasant what Mother insists on calling the last of her days. These remarks come often when the sun is out and always in front of company. Last Tuesday, when they were halfway through a second turn around the park, Mother sung from her wheelchair one of her favourite refrains. "The 13-year-old girl that lives 3 doors down is further along in her career than you are." The butcher and his wife, who they'd met along their way, smiled politely and widened all 4 of their eyes, for they liked Marta and wished not to make a fool of her. Marta wanted to point out that the girl from number 12 probably didn't know how to wheel throw and deliver a perfect thin-walled clay pot, but she knows better than to brag, and gives her mother a berth wide enough to see her back to the house and through to supper. Mother's new mantra is served cold of late every mealtime and goes something like this: "I loathe a useless vessel. What's the point of a pot if it can't hold anything?" Marta applies vast amounts of butter with force to a slice of white bread. Violent lashings. Only in a moment such as this will she condone the use of her given nickname and take pleasure in calling herself Butter. She chuckles inwardly at the thought of spreading herself thickly over bread. What a treat to spread herself in this way when she spreads herself so thinly in all other areas of her life. She swipes the excess butter from the knife and drops her hand to her side as if the movement is nothing, smiling with mouth chewing and closed as Tripe the dog licks at her butter fingers. Tripe the dog is a useless vessel for most hours in the day, but this act has graciously given him a use, sparing him from Mother's damnation. Tripe the titbit and butter deposit. As she looks at the pet cruelly named after Mother's fondness for the food, Marta lets her words become feral and untethered in her mind, and suddenly she's eating the dog. These are games typical of the beast. She lets it play and pays it no mind. And as Butter slips down the throat of Tripe, we'll circle back to why those who know her call her Butter. After breakfast on a Sunday, Marta left the house, tightly spun and dressed for Mass, paying heed to a hole in her stomach that was bigger than the one she'd sat down to eat with. Marta knew this to be an attribute of the beast, the influence of her belly over her head. Her stomach often told her what she'd expect to hear from her heart, and she found it hard to tell the difference between the feeling of fullness from food from that of love. The hole was wide and wanting, carved out by her mother's words at breakfast, and she knew that she must fill it with something else. The shape of the hole didn't feel like one that could be satisfied with food. Would a gift from Mother pacify the ache? She set about finding something that would make a worthy offering. Marta was almost rid of her teenage years, which would mean that Nutsford was not yet Nutsford. Before its green parts were tended to, and people had stopped searching its floor for clay, the place was known as Matthew's Lane Tip. Under Matthew's name, an unholy pile of household items were laid to a crooked rest, crying out to past owners who could no longer bear the sight of them. The pile was haloed by throngs of shimmering flies, open-mouthed birds, and in the summer, butterflies. The hole in Marta's stomach gave a modest moan at the sight of the butterflies, and then the decision was made. She would climb over fridge and pram, catch one, and press it behind glass for Mother to enjoy daily. A small painted wooden frame in the kitchen that currently held a photograph of Marta as a baby would do the job nicely. Delighted as she was with her gift, she told as many people as would listen on her walk home, clutching the now flightless thing in her hand. Word of her strange cruelty to the insect spread through the town with such ease that Marta quickly became known as Butterfly Girl, which was soon after shortened. It must be noted, whether landed on with intent or by chance, the idea to rid the word butterfly of its wings and spell out Marta's crime is a creative one and sharp. For that we salute the brute who conceived of the name. Needless to say, Mother did not like the butterfly. We already know of the great way in which items without a practical use trouble her so. However many times we call her by another name, Marta is a mother. Before the month is up, she'll have no choice but to wear the title, but until then she is a vessel. It makes her shine a little despite herself, the source of the light being the thought of Mother's preference for a vessel with a use. Her pregnancy was at least in this way a small victory. But her newly packed belly and the utility of it all was not enough to rid Marta of that flat disconnect some mothers claim to feel with their unborn child. Really, she saw herself as a flightless stork, and the foreign orb that she wore swelling across her front was a package she was contracted to deliver onto someone else's doorstep. She'd walk a wary half-step behind the growth that preceded her, studying its terrible roundness, scaling the skirts of Nutsford and assessing the park's unseen pockets. She'd think of where she might deposit the thing once it was born. This and casting the baby's body in clay were thoughts she knew were ones best kept to herself, and perhaps required some conscious pushing from her mind. In these final days leading up to the birth, Marta has become a child again, and as a child of 40 it isn't easy to ask for what you need without soiling the mother name and stroking the part she calls beast. She finds herself standing before her own mother's door, as a fresh half-woman and deeply wishing to live as a girl again. At least as a girl she was whole, and beastliness could wear the cloak of spirited. The new order of the day, to give all her attention to another, seemed an unfair demand of the born-again Marta. And why should she give up her other names to take on Mother, when her own was still around? There didn't seem to be enough room to be Marta, Beast, and Mother at once. She'd always been able to fit her whole life in her mouth, but now her lot was growing and threatening to spill. It's clear to us, but not quite yet to Marta, that this fullness, she feels, calls for only bend or break, a lesion in need of a bleed. The day is Friday, and the last in Marta's working week. The studio has been free of students since 4, and she is at least an hour into her lonely craft of birthing and breaking. It's her own giving and taking of life, and she relishes a quiet pleasure in destroying a good number of her clay creations. The ones she has kept, though small in number, are becoming a filthy brood. It's almost time to open the door to a fresh clutch, who've been nourished for the asking time required to give them mouths and make them vital. Before extending a hand to release the kiln door, Marta thinks of Mother. Having always been the kind of person who is at the hopeless mercy of signs and signals, this apparition of Mother in the mind was surely one that carried meaning, and now Marta had no choice but to search for her. Caked in with the clay scraps beneath her nails, breathing with the dry fog that chokes the room at the waist, one in the crowd of young pots waiting for Marta in the belly of the kiln. The opening is clean and without tears. She scans the slick mob. One pot strikes her. It's clearly lost itself in the heat and now lies flat, shallow, and tight-lipped. It resembles a dish like the ones Mother uses for butter or soap. Praise be! She'd finally created something useful, and the girl in Marta lets out a mewl of satisfied purpose. She leaves the studio, full and with an honest gift that didn't require the taking of life or the severance of wings. She holds in her mind the tender glow of Mother, cradling the dish in 2 clean palms and blessing it as useful. After the perpetual passing through the hands of Nutsford, she is at her mother's gates, butter dish in hand and heart fit to split. She lets herself into the house for the first and last time, the way it always is. One Marta to enter, one Marta to leave. Something quick and rude is hanging like a limerick in the hallway, and she understands there has been a change in frequency. Tripe the dog is sitting on the second stair, which he only does when there's no one worth begging of in the house. Then clarity arrives, early and unkind. The rude welcome that had greeted her in the hallway now introduces itself to Marta in a language with which she's unhappily well versed. It's a residual staining of space that speaks of the recent end of a cycle, and it shares in the clay smell that her father left in his wake. Mother is sitting simply in her chair, quiet, dead. Marta runs her eyes over her mother's bent knees and lets them fall to rest in her hands, where she stays for a little while. She gives Mother a curt nod and is glad she got the death she'd prayed for. Dressed, after lunch, upright, not lying down. Marta places the young butter dish bragging on the windowsill beside 3 dead flies. She opens the kitchen drawer that her mother used to house all manner of items nondescript and pointless. Her fingers find and close around the pressed butterfly, and she slips it into the lining of her jacket. It seems fitting that she should take the ornamental offering Mother always thought so useless, and leave her instead with the practical butter dish, empty and asking on the sill. She fills Tripe's water bowl and drops a handful of biscuits into a single square of linoleum floor. She moves back through the hallway without looking again on the house of her mother. She'll delay the dealings that the situation requires until she's taken a last turn around the park. And there's no one but Tripe to give testament to the cold way in which she received the death of her mother, so she saves herself a punishing. Nutsford welcomes her once more with broken arms. She spills, it listens and swallows. She traces the parts she had once asked to shelter her, and the pockets she'd imagined she might deposit her child. She shakes hands with the versions of herself that she'd planted in the beds to be with the worms and flowers, not stopping as she usually did to water them. This is what we know to come next, and we'll share in this knowledge with Marta. She'll return to the house and take of her mother what didn't fit her until now, and emerge as a vessel, whole and worthy of its holdings. Tripe will tag along for the journey. He's a fine companion, and it's always well advised to have a deposit to hand in the occasion of titbits or excess butter. There's a loosening in Marta's throat. A clean haunt starts to sing in the left side of her womb. This time, when she leaves the park, she is Marta, she is beast, and she is freshly mother.
Tripe, written and recorded by Verity Platt, with music by Oscilloscope, and the series editor was Richard V. Hurst. You Are Here is produced by Levenshulme Old Library. It was commissioned by The Space and made possible with support from Arts Council England.